Welcome to our class on Chassidus. We're going to be learning a beautiful, deep Chassidic discourse from the Rebbe. The name of the Chassidic discourse is called Shoftim v'Shoitrim. The Rebbe said this Chassidic discourse in Shabbos Parsha Shoftim, that year it was on the 6th day of the month of Elul, in the year Tafshin Mem Aleph, 41 years ago. So again, the Chassidic discourse is based on the verse that it says in this week's Torah portion, Shoftim v'Shoitrim Titin lecha b'chol sharecha. Judges and officers you should place on all the gates. So the Rebbe brings from the Tzemach Tzedek, who's the third Chabad Rebbe, in his classical works on mysticism on the Parsha called Oir HaTorah. So he brings an insight based on the verse, and he brings from the commentary of called the Shach. So the Shach says as follows. When the Torah says you should place judges and officers on all the gates, you have a little of an insight on all the gates of the city. But the Rebbe brings from the Oir Torah from the Tzemach Tzedek, who brings from the Shach that says that what does it mean, the gates? It's not only referring to the physical gates, but it's actually referring to the limbs of the body. What are they? So the Shach explains and he says, it's referring to the two eyes, the two ears, the mouth, your hands, and your feet. So basically the full structure of the human being. On the full structure of the human being, your eyes where you come in contact with the world, the ears where you listen to things in the world, the way you speak to the world, the way you use your hands to engage in the world, the way you use your feet. So on all those levels you have to have proper protection of judges and officers, etc. And you have to place these judges and officers to protect you. That's one insight. Then, in the same Chassidic discourse from the Tzemach Tzedek, he brings another insight. And he brings it from Sefer Yetzirah, which is a book in Kabbalah. And over there he says as follows, that there's different letters. And he says there are letters which are called 7 double letters. What are the 7 double letters? So it's put together as like 2 words made up of 7 letters. Beged Kapoiris, Beis Gimel Dalid, Chaf Pei Reish and Saf are double letters. And he used those double letters. Hashem used those double letters, and he created from them the stars in the heaven, the days in the year, and the gates on the soul. And the Ravid explains, what does that mean? And it's also explained, obviously, in Sefer Yetzirah itself, that what is these Beged Kapoiris, these 7 letters that he used to create the stars and the days of the week, the 7 days of the week, and the seven gates. What is it? So he says like this: it's the 2 eyes, the 2 ears, the 2 nostrils, and the mouth. In other words, according to the Sefer Yetzirah, the 7 gates is referring to only the 7 gates on your head. The 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and the mouth. That equals 7. Not like we learned before from the Shach, that's the eyes and the ears and the mouth and your hands and your feet. In other words, so you see there's two different insights what the gates are. According to the Shach, they're referring to the eyes, the ears, the mouth, and then he goes over to the hand and the feet. According to Sefer Yetzirah, which a book in Kabbalah is referring to the eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and the mouth. Okay, what does that mean? The Rebbe explains like this. So he goes on to bring from what it says in Sefer Yetzirah over there, that besides the 7 letters that he used to create the heaven, that he used to create the stars and the days and the 7 gates like we mentioned before, he goes on to explain that there are 3 emos. What is 3 amos? Three foundations for the building. So those are 3 different letters. What are the 3 different letters? Aleph, Mem, Shin. What does Aleph, Mem, Shin stand for? So Aleph stands for Avir, for ear. Mem stands for Mayim, water. And Shin stands for Eish, because in the word fire you have the letter Shin. And the 7 doubles, what is the 7 doubles? Like we already said before, those are the letters of Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Chav, Pei, Rei, Saf. So the Rebbe brings with the altar of Tanya, in the beginning of Tanya, and he says, what are the mothers? The mothers are referring to what? The intellect. Why? Why is the mother called intellect? Because just like from a mother you give birth to a child, so the same thing also, the intellect gives birth to the emotions. So therefore, what are the emotions giving birth to? That's the 7 doubles, which is the midas, the emotions. Now, why is the emotions called doubles? So the Rebbe explains, because in every emotion, every one of the spheroids, you have 2 different ways that it's going to. One is ratzui, a yearning, and one shuv. So that's why it's called kafulos, double. Why? Because since it's referring to the emotions, and the emotions have the part where it yearns, ratzui, and you have the part shuv where it comes back, that's why it's called double. And like the Rebbe explains as follows when he says like this. Take, for example, the attribute of ahava, of love. In other words, what is the nature of love? The love is yearning. What does it mean someone's yearning? Someone has a love for Hashem. So you're yearning to go higher and higher and cleave to Hashem. That's the level of Ratzui. So in Ava, the primary force is what? The yearning to cleave to Hashem. Or in a relationship, it's yearning to cleave to your partner. Ava is all about Ratzui, the yearning to go to a higher. But nevertheless, even though its primary force of love is the yearning to go higher, but it also has the component of shuv where it returns back. Like it says in the Talmud, based on the verse, that it says in Torah, V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, that you should love God, your God, and that's the love, that's the yearning that we have. So what does it say in the Talmud? So what does that mean you should love God, your God? So it explains that Hashem's name should be loved through you. What does that mean? Hashem's name should be loved through you. In other words, how is Hashem's name going to be loved through you? That is when you deal with the world. In other words, Av on its own, you're yearning to be with Hashem. But if you want everybody to have a love for Hashem, they have to look at you. They have to interact with you. Now, when you're yearning, you're not interacting. So on one hand, from the love perspective, you just want to cleave to Hashem. You don't want to deal with the world. Who wants to deal with the world? Materialism, physicality. You just want to deal with spirituality and godliness. But on the other hand, since the Ahavta, part of the commandment of the Ahavta is that we should be a walking image and an emissary and someone that say, oh, I want to cleave to Hashem because this is a godly person. So in order to do that, you have to interact with people. Now, interacting with people, that's already shuv, that's you returning to reality. So you see, in ava, in love, you have the component of love where you're yearning to cleave to Hashem, but then you also have the component of love where you're interacting with the world, you're shuv coming back into this world. That is with the first midah of ava, which is connected to the idea of chesed. Then you have the second midah. What's the second midah? The second midah is called yira, to be in awe of Hashem. Now, generally speaking, the main thrust of yira is shuv. What does that mean? Why is it called shuv? Are you returning down to reality? Like the verse says in the Torah, Vayar ha'am, the Jewish people saw the presence of God. Vayanu, they trembled. Vayamdu me'rachoik, they went backwards. So you see that yira, when somebody's in awe, you're running to it. Ava, with love, you're yearning. You want to go to it. But yira, you're standing back. In other words, you're returning, so to speak. So even though the main thrust of yira is to return, it's shuv, but there's also a component in yira where there's a yearning, and you want to get close to it. Why? Because what's the ultimate purpose of yira? The ultimate purpose of yira, to be in awe of Hashem, is not to run away from Hashem. The ultimate purpose of yira is to be humble. What does it mean you're humble? You become totally humble, and you realize that the true existence is Hashem, and then you become one with Hashem. So even though yira, its initial reaction is, oh my gosh, I'm in awe of Hashem, I'm standing back. But what happens when you're in awe of Hashem and you really start integrating the being awe of Hashem? So in the beginning, it's shuv, you just want to stay, you're frightened possibly. But what happens as you develop a relationship, an awe relationship with Hashem, then a person becomes humble, and as you become humble, you actually cleave more and deeper to Hashem. So you see, both Ava, even though the primary force is the Ratzoi, the yearning, but it also has a component of Shuv, because you're involved in the world, you're a representation of Hashem. Yira is the same thing also. On one hand, the Shuv, you don't want to get burned, so to speak, from the godly fire, but nevertheless, Yira brings you to a great closeness to Hashem, and actually even a deeper closer to Hashem. So you see, both Abba and Yira have both. That's why it's called Kfula. It's double. It has the Ratzui and it has the Shuv. And the same applies, Rebbe says, to all the other attributes of Tiferes, Netzach, Hoid, Yesoid, Malchus. All the other 5 attributes, all the other 5 midos, they all have the component. On one hand, it's Ratzui, it's a yearning, and then they have the idea of Shuv that has both components to it. Now, so this, the Rebbe explains, this is the idea of the 7 gates of the soul. And as generally speaking, what are the 7 gates? So the 7 gates, there's specifically a 7, but if you put it into a more of a bigger picture, they're referring to the 4 levels of seeing, hearing, smell, and speaking. Those are the 4 in general. It gets broken down to 7 because in seeing you have 2 eyes, in hearing you have 2 ears, and in the nostrils you have 2 nostrils. So each one, for those 3 have a double, so that's how you have 7. But generally speaking, we're referring to the 4 senses that we have in our head, again, which are seeing, hearing, smelling, and speaking. Now, we're going to take it a step further and a step deeper. These 4 senses that we have of seeing, hearing, smelling, and speaking, they're actually connected to the most powerful name of Hashem. What's the most powerful name of Hashem? Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey. And let's explain at length in the Zohar that the way each one of these senses of seeing, and they'll explain soon as well, of seeing, hearing, and smelling, and speaking is connected to the 4 letters of Hashem's name. And like it's explained, the author explains actually in Likutei Torah at length, in last week's Torah portion, in Parshas Re'eh, based on the verse that it says in the Torah. So what does it say in the Torah? It says, Panim befanim diber Hashem imochem. Face to face, Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, spoke to us. In other words, it's referring to on the time of Torah when Hashem came down to give us a Torah. So when Hashem came to give us a Torah, it says face to face, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei spoke to us. What does that mean practically, on a spiritual level? That when Hashem gave us a Torah, He drew down into every single one of us, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, literally into our face. In other words, the Yud, the Hey, the Vav Hey was connected to our face. What's in our face? Again, the ability to see, to hear, to smell, and to speak. And like the verse says clearly, Anoichi, referring to the essence of Hashem, Hashem, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, Elokecha, becomes your God. So the Anoichi, the essence of Hashem, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, becomes our God. In other words, that the Yud Kei Vav Kei Elokecha means our power and our energy, that Yud Kei Vav Kei becomes our energy, who we are, of every single one of us. And that's why every one of us, think about this powerful stuff, every one of us have Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey of Hashem's name within us. And like the author explains at length, in a lot of details, this is the general idea in the Likutei Torah and also in the classic book of the Alter Rebbe of Tanya in Igeres HaTshuva. Now, so what does that mean practically? What does it mean we have Yud Kei Vav Kei, Yud Hey Vav Hey within us? And that's why, and that's connected to the idea of seeing, hearing, the smell, and the speaking, which is connected to the 4 letters of Yud Hey Vav Hey. So what's the connection? What's the practical connection between these 4 letters and these 4 senses? It never explains like this. We'll start with seeing first. The sense that we have to see, what does it mean you see something? When you see something, you become close to it. Why? Because when you see something, you grasp it. You get it, you understand it, you see it, you're connected to it. So seeing is a closeness. On the other hand, when you hear something, you don't see it, it's not close, you hear, hearsay. So that's like from far. So therefore, what happens when you hear something, you don't see it, you don't really get it. You have another detail someone tells you, another part of the story, and you hear another detail, which these two components of seeing, which is close, hearing, which is from far, that's connected to the first two letters of Hashem's name, the Yud and the Hey, which is seeing and hearing. And which that's also connected to, we know that Yud Hey is connected, Yud is connected to Chachma, the flash of an idea, and the Hey is connected to Bina. So Yud is connected to seeing, like the flash of an idea of Chachma, and the Hey is hearing, like the more details of Bina. The letters Vav Hey, we know, in Kabbalah is referring to the Midos, the emotions. And like it's explained many, many places, that when a person meditates on the greatness of Hashem, how great Hashem is, infinite Hashem, how low we are, we're just finite. That when a person meditates, what's that called? That's called the level of Yud and Hey. As we know, it says in the Torah that Hanistar, I'll say it in Hebrew, I'll translate, Hanistar is Hashem Elokeinu. You know, the things that are hidden are for Hashem, and afterwards, what happens afterwards? Then you have the level of working on the emotions. And the emotions, that's the part that's more revealed to us. And those the Vav Hey, that's referring to the emotions. So Yud Hey again is referring to Chachma and Bina, seeing and hearing, the hidden part. Vav Hey is on the other hand referring to the emotions, and that's the revealed part. So that's in general. More deeper and more specific, the Rebbe says, that those, even though we divided before of intellect is more the concealed part, the histories, and the emotions is the real part, now I was going to go down a step further and say like this, that the emotions of Ava and Yira, love and awe, that's the concealed part. What's the revealed part? That's when we learn Torah and we do mitzvahs with our speech, and with our voice. That's the idea of Vav Hey, that's when we make it revealed. In other words, emotions are great, but the emotions are concealed. When do the emotions become revealed? They become revealed when you learn Torah, when you do mitzvahs, then you bring the emotions into the world. And this is the connection between the two different senses that we have of smell and speech. Why? Because smell is more what in Hebrew it's called makif. It hovers over. What does that mean? Like it says, reichos hoyu. What does that mean, reichos? In other words, you smell it. You're not getting the thing itself. When you smell something, you're not grasping the thing itself. It's beautiful fragrance. So you're getting from the makif of it. You're getting from the around of it. You're not getting the essence of it itself. But nevertheless, when you smell something, it touches your soul. You smell a good incense, it touches you. In other words, matter of fact, as we all know, when someone, God forbid, is fainting, and you have like some kind of good smelling salt, or some kind of good something to smell, the person can wake up, and you can literally wake someone that's fainting. So again, so even though reyach is makif, but it reaches someone, it reaches you at premius, but it starts off at makif. On the other hand, that's what reyach, that's from the smell. It's more makif. On the other hand, dibur, speech, that is when it's an internal connection. When someone speaks, that's the person himself speaking and connecting to the other person in an internal way. And like the Rebbe brings an example where it says in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, that if you saw someone talking, so in other words, so he gives an example, you saw someone talking, what were they saying? What does that mean? Because when someone's talking, that's already an internal connection that's deep, that's meaningful. Or for example, he never quotes in the prophets where it says that the soul went out b'dabre. When the person was speaking, their soul left, because the power of speech is very, very strong. And the same thing also when you use your mouth to eat. In other words, you're getting the essence of the person. However, the awakening part comes from smell. And in a practical level, on a spiritual level, it's referring to the two different components of Torah and mitzvahs. When a person learns Torah, that goes internal, it's internalized within the person. On the other hand, when you do mitzvahs, it's more it's a more makif connection. Now, but nevertheless, in every one of these levels, seeing, hearing, smelling, and speaking, on every one of the levels, you'll have a component of ratzui, where it's a yearning, and then you have a shuv, where it's returning. Like it's explained in Orah Torah, and that's why it's called kafulas, it's double. Why is it double? It's double because each shmita has the yearning part, and then it has the returning part. And they receive from these double letters of Beis, Gimel, Dalid, Chaf, Pei, Rei, Shaf, as we call Beged Kapiris, the idea of Ratzui V'Shuv. So based on this, Rebbe explains so beautifully, and he says like this. That's why it says, V'Shaftu Esa'am, they'll judge the people, Mishpat, a judgment of tzedek, righteousness. In other words, according to the Shach, the first insight that we learned in the beginning of the Chassidic Discourse, shoftim, the judges you put on the gates. So according to the Shach, what are the gates? It's referring to all the limbs of the body. The eyes, hearing, the speaking, and your hands and your feet. In other words, so if you have gates on the whole part of a person, so when it says afterwards you have gates there, and every full part of the person. So what does it mean? They're gonna judge the nation, so to speak, outside the person. So when it says they're gonna judge the nation, it's referring to that doing our work in the world. In other words, the part that we have to do to transform the world. That's according to the first insight that since you're already protected, you're fully protected, so now you have to do your work with the world. But according to the second insight of the Sefer Yetzirah, of the Zoyar, that shoftim is shoftim, you're putting it on the gates. And what are the gates? It's referring to all the gates of the head, the eyes, the ears, the nostril, and the mouth. In other words, obviously the intellect, but the emotions, the way they're connected into the intellect. So based on this, when it says v'shaftu asa'am, they're going to judge the nation, you still got to deal with the rest of the body. And like it says, like the Senes of Seeing writes in our Torah, in connection to the insight of the Sefer Yetzirah, where the gates is referring to the 7 gates in the head. So what does it mean? They're going to judge the body. You have to protect the body. It means it has to protect all the 248 limbs in the body. Now, based on this, Rebbe says, this that Sefer Yetzirah, the book of the Zohar, says that this gates that it's protecting shoftim is referring to exclusively the gates in their head, the 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils in the mouth, because the Sefer Yetzirah is referring to the creation of the first man, Adam Rishon, and he was born alone. When Adam Rishon was born, there was no one in the world; he was there by himself. So therefore, since there was no world to deal with, there was no one else to deal with, Sefer Yetzirah was referring to the creation of the first man, Adam Rishon. So when it says referring to the gates on the head, and therefore when it says v'shaftu asa'am, it's referring to judge the person, the rest of the human being, the hands, the body, the feet, etc. And Rebbe goes on to explain. He says and this is what it means when it says shoftim v'shoitrim. Officers and judges, you should titin l'cha, you should give to you. In other words, that you have to have the spiritual work of shoftim, a judge, and a shaiter, an officer. In other words, what's the difference on a spiritual level between a judge and an officer? And Rebbe explains on a spiritual level it's as follows: a shofet, a judge, is kav hayamin, it's the right side. It's more chesed, it's more love. On the other hand, a shaiter, an officer, it's no love there. He's actually putting in the rules. He's implementing the rules. It's more from the left side. And like the author explains in Tanya. So shaiter is referring to the right, shaitrim is referring to the left, and when it says v'shaftu asa'am mishpat tzedek, so mishpat again is referring to the right, tzedek is referring to the left. In other words, and generally speaking, what does it mean practically, the right and the left? So we all know that we have 613 commandments. 248 positive commandments, which is the right. Do this, do that, you get closer to Hashem, the positive commandments. And then the negative precepts of 365, that's the left. Don't do this, don't do that, etc. In other words, why is that? Because when a person wants to have a relationship with Hashem, a person wants to have an avodah, serving Hashem, you have to serve on both sides. And the ratzoi, the yearning, the positive commandments, getting closer to Hashem, the love for Hashem. But then you also need the shuv. You need the negative precepts, the being awe of Hashem, what not to do, etc. Or as we know, the famous expression, Yamin, the right, brings someone close, and the smile, unfortunately, pushes someone away. But you need both to keep you in balance. Or like, for example, the Rebbe brings a famous story in the Talmud where the rabbi asked him, Klum Maisa Baliyatcha, did a story happen to you? In other words, he wanted to know if he was able to serve Hashem against his nature. The fact that he served Hashem in one path, that's fine. But the question, the real test is, can you serve Hashem against your nature? So somebody's naturally kind and loving. The question is, are you able to serve Hashem if you have to in the left side? A little more discipline. Or if someone's more disciplined, could you also serve Hashem out of love? In other words, specifically when a person is willing to serve Hashem in something which is against your nature, that shows that you're really serving Hashem. That shows that you're serving Hashem as complete. Or like it says, for example, a beautiful insight from the Sifri in the first section of the Shema, where it says, "V'yahavta." The Sifri something very powerful. And he says like this: that there's no such thing in humans in the same thrust. You love and you're in awe. It's either love or it's in awe. It's either right or it's left. You can't be both. However, the Sifri writes that there's only place where you can have love and awe and love together is only with Hashem. Only with Hashem you can love Hashem and you can be in awe of Hashem. With humans, if you love them, that's great. And the minute you put a little discipline, they run away. Or if you discipline and try to come close, it's not going to work. But with Hashem, you could have both and you should have both. You have to work on both components of love and awe. And Rebbe finishes off and he says like this: when we do our spiritual work, and like the Torah says, tzedek tirdoif, which basically means you do it in a way with a good eye. You want to do more and more and more. So what happens when you go against your nature and you do more against your nature, what happens is you draw down from on high from Hashem, that Hashem, the one that judges the earth, will bring out a good judgment for all of us. And the good judgment is, and the great judgment is, that Hashem is going to redeem us in this galus. And He's going to take us out with Mashiach Tzidkenu, who's going to come and redeem us, and He's going to take us standing upright to the Eretz Yisrael. And like the Rebbe finishes off, it should happen, b'meheira b'yameinu mamash, quickly in our days, in a real and practical way. So here you have another beautiful Chassidic discourse, shoftim and a practical one, how literally you can transform our lives by serving Hashem from the right, from the left, on all levels, and transforming the world, and ultimately bringing, like the Rebbe finishes off and says, bringing the redemption for each and every one of us as we serve Hashem with tremendous love and awe on all levels. Have a great and blessed week. Shavua Tov.